Hello again and welcome to Dos Gatos Forge. I'm Joshua States, and this is the next installment of the Stag Antler handled Bowie work in progress. And today we're going to look at the finish grinding and the finish sanding of the blade. We've already forged the blade, we've put it through a rough grind and annealing and heat treatment, and now we're getting ready to do the finish grinding and shaping of the blade. Now, finish grinding is an awful lot like the rough grinding. We use pretty much the same tools. We use the 2x72 belt grinder and we use the 9-inch disc sander. We set this up for a bit of surface grinding. And then we come back in and we do some more work on the 2x72 on the bevels. And then we do some more work on the bevels. And then we move to the disc sander and we do some disc sanding. And you know what, we're going to do a little more disc sanding. As a matter of fact, we're going to disc sand that puppy up to about 400 grit on the disc. And then, once we've got all of that done, we're going to move to the real meat of hand finishing. And hand finishing is all done on the bench. Let me swing over there. We have this bench vise that has been mounted to the side of the bench. And we can put a piece of 2x3/8 flat steel in there, a little rubber pad, and we can clamp that blade down in there to keep it nice and solid. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a bunch of hand finishing on this and show you how that gets done. We're going to take this blade up to around, I'd say about 800 grit, maybe 1,000 grit, before we go to etch it and try to get the Hamon out. So now we get to the real fine part of the finish grinding, which is the hand sanding process, which is where we're going to put our finish on the blade and the ricasso area to the point where we really want it to be when the knife is almost completely done. We're not going to put any fittings onto this knife. We're not going to fit anything to it or put any handle attachments on it until after our hand sanding is complete. Now, it's important when you're doing hand sanding that you have some sort of a setup that makes the knife completely held firm and solid and flat where you're going to be doing your sanding. This setup is a vise that's attached to the side of the bench over there. I've got a 3/8 inch piece of flat steel. I've got a rubber guard to keep my blade from getting scratched up on the steel, and I'm going to start hand sanding. Now, I have a variety of tools that I use in hand sanding. These are my primary tools. This is a piece of engraver's plate. You'll see these with people's names engraved in them on office doors. This is just a piece of 1x8 inch flat steel that I have beveled to a sharp edge. And this is a piece of steel 1 inch wide, 1/4 inch thick, and I have laminated a piece of rubber to it. I have a couple other small pieces to get into the tight corners and stuff. You'll see that. Now I'm going to start hand sanding on the ricasso flat area, and I'm going to get that finished to about 400 grit. I've sanded it already to about 320 and a little buff of 400 on the disc sander. This area here has been sanded to roughly, in some places you can see scratches from the 220, and you can see smooth places from the 400. I've gone over that with the disc sander with a couple of different grits just to see how it works out. And I don't know if you can see it, but I can see it in the light. There seems to be a little bit of a Hamon starting to show itself along the top part of the blade here. I'm pretty excited about that. That'll come out a little bit more as we start to really polish the blade. So I have some just a regular orange degreaser spray for my lubricant. I take my scraps of 320 and 400 sandpaper off that I cut off of the disc sanding. I cut those into 1-inch wide strips. I also have some micron paper. 30 micron is 320 approximately. This is a 3M product. I really like it. It's got a mylar backing, fairly stiff. And I'm going to start by spraying some fluid on the ricasso flat area. And I'm going to wrap my 320 silicon carbide paper around the metal side of this because I want a real flat surface. And I'm going to start with even pressure and short strokes, and I'm going to just sand that area out. And I'm going to let this edge trail off onto the blade area because I want to define that spot there as well. And I'm just going to move along using fresh paper periodically when I feel it start to skate and slide. Get a new spot. When it gets too dry, I wipe off all the grit with a paper towel and check my progress. Spray a little more and continue. And you can see where there are still some scratches left from previous grits, from previous sandings. And you just keep going at it until you get all those done. Get those all pulled out. And once we get the flats done on both sides, then we'll start working on the blade. Now with the flats in the ricasso at this point, they're finished to 320, and the final strokes are slow and steady in line with the knife, which is how I want most of my end finishing strokes to be on the knife when I'm done. My final grid is going to be slow, steady strokes along the length of the knife. So now I'm going to go back to 220 here on the blade by hand sanding, and this is where I'm going to have to do a little backwards thinking. I'm going to finish these faces with sandpaper to somewhere around 400 grit before I go to a little bit finer. Actually, to get the Hamon out, I'm going to be finishing at 1,000 grit. So 1,000 is going to go this way. 800 I am going to sand across the knife. 600 I'm going to go this way. 400 I'm going to go across the knife. 320 I'm going to go this way. And 220 I'm going to be scrubbing in this direction. So I'm going to go in this direction with my 220, and I'm going to scrub all of these lines out until I've got a pretty uniform finish across the knife at 220. And it's not going to be a perfectly perpendicular scrub. It's going to be more on an angle. I'm going to use this flat stick here. I'm going to go at a straight angle right in the edge here on the ricasso. And I'm going to scrub this blade out at 220. And you can see this is going to take a very long time. I'm going to go at 220 here on this, and then I'm going to show you when I get to 320 how I change directions. Well, I've been scrubbing for a little while, and I have some persistent divots here, some persistent heavy scratching from some of the rougher grits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make use of this little tool that I made here out of the 1/8 regular mild steel, and I'm going to wrap a piece of this 60 micron finishing film, which is roughly about 220, and I'm going to put that into the palm of my hand, and I'm going to get in there and I'm going to scrub pretty hard in those spots.
Now the biggest question he gets all the time: did you buy that boat? Christian 1025 KNIX.
And I'm going to keep scrubbing in those spots until I get rid of those little divots. We can see that they're starting to get shallower and they're starting to disappear. So we're going to keep going at that until we get this side totally clean at 220. Well, I've gotten all of those scratches out, and I've got my 220 grits running basically either straight across the blade or at a 45-degree angle of the blade at 220. Now I can move to 320. And to do that, I'm going to go and I'm going to take my rubber backed sanding thing, and I'm going to move in strokes along the length of the blade. And if I've missed anything of the lower grits, they're going to pop right out really fast, and I know I can go back over them again with the 220 and grind those out. So we're going to keep going at 320 for a while and get that side finished. Well, we're almost done with the 320 grit in this direction here. You can see that this is really kind of smoothed out, very uniform. Most of the sanding was done with this part, with this piece in this sort of a direction to grind out most of the things. I've still got a couple of small scratches. You can't see them in the video, but I can see them with the Optivisor in this area here that run across the blade from the 220. I haven't been able to get in quite tight enough in there to get them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift to this thinner stick, and I'm going to get in there really, really hard in those areas, and I'm going to take those scratches out. And I'm going to use kind of short strokes to grind away at those spots and get in tight to the plunge cuts. This sanding stick has a very tight, sharp corner on it. And I want to stress something about hand sanding. It's very easy to get caught up in the body, the center of the blade, and only focus on there and ignore the edges. And the edges tend to get away from you a little bit, and they tend to have leftover scratches. Get yourself a nice pair of either 3-power readers from the drugstore, or a good pair of 5-power Optivisors for doing this work. It really allows you to see what's going on in detail. All of those little scratches that go across the blade may not be visible to the naked eye, but they will get caught in various lighting. When the light moves from side to side, you'll see those scratches a lot more. Well, I have hand sanded the knife out to about 800 grit, 15 micron on the 3M level here. And I've cleaned it all off. I've gotten all my fingerprints and all my residue off from the lubricant that I use for the hand sanding. I'm going to put it in this plastic tub, and I'm going to pour some white vinegar, just plain old distilled white vinegar, for Monk's brand, over the top of it to see if that Hamon is going to come out any in here. So I'm just going to pour some vinegar on it. See if I can get it immersed. This tub doesn't actually have a flat bottom, so I'm going to agitate it a little bit. I'm going to rock it back and forth. See when it starts to oxidize a little. You can see that the blade is changing color in there. It's going to take a couple of minutes here, but I'm just going to keep agitating it like this and flip the blade over every once in a while. See what happens. See if anything starts to come out of it. Okay. It's been cooking in here and agitating for a little while, and I can see what's going on. It's very interesting. It's developing a very peculiar looking finish. I don't know if you can see this, but you can see a lot of grain. You can see the Hamon is starting to come out in this area on both sides of the knife, and in the darker area it's sort of almost kind of a speckled Woots-like finish. I don't know if I like that. I'm going to have to check it out, clean it off. I'm going to neutralize the vinegar with a little spray down of Windex, and then I'm going to take 9 micron sandpaper and just lightly kind of buff along. Now for this operation I'm actually going to use this as my sanding block. This is just a white rubber eraser like you can get at, you know, almost any stationary drugstore kind of thing. And just with a light touch, just going to kind of go across the faces and the ricasso area. 9 micron, this is about, I'd say probably somewhere around 15 or 1600 grit, I think, something like that. Looks like that speckled nature is going away. The Hamon is coming out a little bit there, yeah. Kind of very light. It's almost not there. Now the final polish on this is not the final polish, will be done much later, and I'll use a loose silicon oxide abrasive, just a powdered abrasive. Right now I'm just trying to see what I can get out of it. it over and try the other side. See what the other side ends up looking like. Well, here we are. After we got done soaking it in the vinegar, we gave it a quick dip in the ferric chloride to bring out the Hamon, and you can see that the tempering lines have appeared out here. And then after you put it into the ferric chloride, you get a lot of black oxidation on it. So we just cleaned all of that off with just some simple Blue Magic metal polish cream. You can use any kind, flitz, whatever kind of metal polish you have to remove all those black oxides. And now we're going to take some 1500 grit silicon carbide powder, and we're going to polish it up. I've got some gun patches here. These are gun cleaning patches, just soft cotton cloth. And I've got that metal and rubber sanding stick I like to use, and I'm going to back that with just a strip of plain old blue denim jeans that makes for a really good medium for holding the slurry that you're going to create with the silicon carbide. So now I'm going to rearrange the camera up a little bit here. Let's go up a bit. You can see the whole knife situation. I'm going to be using Simple Green for my lubricant, and I'm just going to spray it down and apply some of the loose abrasive. I buy this on eBay. Buy it by the pound or the 2-pound ticket or whatever. Spray down my piece of denim, and then we're going to start to create a little slurry here of silicon carbide powder. You want it to be not dry. You want it to be fairly smushy. And I'm not applying a lot of pressure, just kind of letting the weight of this bar, the weight of the bar, and just a light pressure on there. I'm going to do my ricasso area. I'm going to use the round corner of that rubberized to get into the plunge cut and make sure I get a nice polishing on the plunge cut. At some point I'm going to tip it over and I'm going to do the clip area, and I'm just going to polish it up. I'm just going to keep it going and see what happens with that little Hamon thing. Keep it wet, keep it more like a slurry. Yeah, I can see it's starting to kind of get better defined a little bit. I can start to see it through the abrasive slurry. Let's grab a paper towel and wipe it off and see what that looks like. Well, it's certainly not what anybody would call a traditional temper line or Hamon, but it is definitely there. I'm going to put the optimizers on. I'm going to take a close look. I'm going to see if there's any places where I really need to get in significantly tight. You can see a couple little things here that aren't really coming out that great. I'm going to take a couple of those little gun patches, spray them down with a little simple green, and put a little of this stuff on there. Go ahead and I'm going to go right in on that spot. And I'm going to do the clip with the gun patch because I can really get my finger in there and make sure I get all on that clip in that little area there. See if I can bring out those two little spots a little bit more. You know, there's a very interesting thing coming out in this temper line. I'm not sure if you can see it in the camera, but there's like some really shiny spots, like little speckles of shiny material in the temper line things. See if I can get a zoom in on that. Clean that up a little. Yeah, there's some really bright shiny spots on that thing. I don't know what that's from. But then again, it's only the second time I've tried this technique of a temper line, so maybe it's something that happens more often than not. I don't know. I have to ask some friends about that. Let me readjust and get a zoom in. No, I guess you can't really see it in the video, but you can start to see the whole Hamon stuff. You can start to see its shape. A little bit of ashy wisps down here. It's looking pretty good. Well, that's basically all there is to polishing the temper line out. You just keep repeating that whole process on both sides of the blade until either you get tired of polishing or it looks good, whichever comes first, as John White used to say. So I'm going to keep polishing this up and we'll wrap up this portion of the finished grind. And stay tuned, we're going to be doing some handle work on the next video. Until next time, this is Josh, Dos Gatos Forge. Thanks and stay sharp.